Mario Baseball, Mario Superstar Baseball, and Mario Super Sluggers. Two very beloved, very popular, and memorable baseball spin-off games for the Mario series. The mechanics, the roster, the fields, the side content, etc. But for almost an entire decade and a half have those times and that series lay dormant. No new game in forever, and neither Nintendo nor Bandai Namco deciding to continue with that Mario Sports series of games. Ever since the Switch, we've seen Nintendo and subsidiaries like Camelot and Next Level Games continue their line of Mario sports games like Mario Tennis, Mario Golf, and just last year, Mario Strikers receiving a new entry, and albeit with some contentions and mixed reception to some elements of each individual new entry, all three games were largely met with solid approval as far as their gameplay and general multiplayer experience on their own. And as of late, even since Mario Strikers Battle League was first announced last spring, plenty of Mario fans danced around the possibility of Mario Baseball making a similar comeback. If Strikers can lay dormant for a long ass time and make it onto modern Nintendo hardware, there's nothing stopping baseball from doing the same, especially when the Mario Baseball games' appeal has always been larger than Strikers. But when you factor those contentions and critiques of those games, that's where I want to chime into this overall discussion. I fully believe a new Mario Baseball game anywhere from the near future to next year is an inevitability. There were some talks of leaks of a new game in development, but come on. If Mario Strikers can make a return and maintain that same gameplay formula and immensely expressive personality after such a long ass time, Mario Baseball was practically guaranteed to do the same at some point. Most people probably came to that conclusion last spring. I already made discussions about this before. One discussion where Strikers and Baseball were, and a second time after Battle League's announcement analyzing the possibility of a new baseball game and what it could do as a proper Super Sluggers follow-up. However, when it comes to whether or not a third Mario Baseball game can live up to Superstar Baseball or primarily Super Sluggers, that's where I start to get a little nervous. I love Mario Baseball. Mario Strikers is my personal favorite Mario Sports series, but the baseball games have always been a remarkably close second. I put so many hours in both games, and I always had a blast grinding them and playing them myself, with siblings, and with friends. They have some of the literal biggest rosters in any Mario game, Super Sluggers having the biggest roster for any Mario game ever until Mario Kart Tour, Donkey Kong and his extended Kong family amongst Diddy, Dixie, Funky, and Tiny, the Kremlings plus King K. Rool, multiple babies, the various colored Yoshis, Toads, Shy Guys, and such, plenty of Bowser's Koopa Troop, bosses like Wiggler, King Boo, Petey Piranha, NPCs like the Nokis and the Piantas, enemies like Goombas, Bloopers, the Hammer Bros lineup, Koopa Troopas, Dry Bones, Monty Mole and whatnot, and the titular main cast of Mario, Luigi, Peach, Daisy, Yoshi, Birdo, Wario, Waluigi, Bowser Jr. and such. Every single one of those characters having varying stats and filling specific roles, power, speed, pitching, and fielding, going from 6 to 9 stadiums in their respective games, and the latter providing a day and night system, giving some stadiums new mechanics and obstacles to deal with, alongside a new aesthetic, Sluggers having items like in Mario Kart to obstruct field plays to your opponent, both games having star power and captains having power pitches and power hits, the whole roster in both games sharing chemistry where certain characters like Mario and Luigi gain a tiny boost in their stats based on who's near whom on the field or who's on base when up to bat, the minigames like Home Run Derby, Wall Ball, Barrel Basher, and more, Toy Field being a whole side mode in of itself, challenges in both to where you complete missions per character and give them a superstar rank to buff their stats permanently, and challenge mode, basically both games' story mode, where Mario and or the captains peruse across the other characters' stadiums to clear minigames and baseball games, amass a large team roster, and eventually work your way to fight and beat Bowser's team in baseball. Both games are the most complex and mechanically in-depth Mario sports games than the other sports series with star power, chemistry, everyone's stats, the field, and such. But it's still made for a very accessible and enriching Mario sports series. Especially in Sluggers' case, both games were packed in content and longevity in both giving you so much to do and unlock, as well as entertaining gameplay across plenty of stadiums and dozens upon dozens of characters that only gets even deeper when you learn the mechanics of each game. It literally was baseball with a Mario twist. If there was a brand new Mario Baseball game, I can envision a decent chunk of what I described being still intact. My optimism and larger hopes for most of, if not all of that being retained, have dwindled a decent amount come the Switch with its other Mario sports games. Now, I'll start off talking about Mario Strikers Battle League, and before I say anything, despite how little I've covered the game post-launch, I will always die on the hill that Battle League is both a pretty good game and a solid piece within the Mario Strikers series. For as much as it didn't live up to Charged in both content and roster, it still had extremely fun and in-depth gameplay. It eventually had a solid roster, and it had oodles of charm, emotion, and that high quality level of animation we got in prior titles, and a lot of that is the core of what makes Mario Strikers to me. A very fun, solid, and adequate Mario Strikers game when you compare to the previous installments. But even when I found plenty of fun and engagement with the game itself, it still got crippled with the problems it had. When it came out, it only had a roster of 10 characters, all of which being almost all your usual Mario fare. Characters like Daisy were added in a future update, and by the time the game finished over a month ago, we ended on 16 characters, whereas Charged across captains and sidekicks had 20. It started out with only 5 stadium themes and ending with 8, one more than what the first game had, Charged having 17, and the roster having almost every captain from Charged minus PD playable, and Toad, Birdo, and Shy Guy upgraded from sidekick to captain-esque status, the only new characters to Strikers being Rosalina and Pauline, which are welcome and great additions, especially in Pauline's case, but that's still less than how you could work with Charged. The entire roster is your literal Mario fare these days, and who you expect out of any Mario spin-off, again Pauline being that exception. And the single-player content being as substantial as the first entry did not do the game any favors for longevity either. Beyond the strings of matches for individual cups as opposed to one elongated circuit of 3 cups with excerpts for your characters, missions like in Charged, or some slightly more fleshed out campaign than those two, beyond online play, Battle League's about as dense and filled as the first entry more or less, using that update model to gradually add more bits and pieces to the character and field roster, yet that literally did so little in adding nor retaining interest in the game. It probably sold more than Strikers Charged, but so much buzz and so much talk, praise, critiques, and general discussion just died after the first 2 weeks of the game coming out, largely because of that insane lack of enticing content across most fronts, and being forced to adopt the update model to maybe get enough to entice more people, which it ended up failing. Even when it was decently close to Charged with character count and roster, and one more field than the first game, it wasn't enough compared to how much less the game had at launch. Mario Golf Super Rush suffered a very similar scenario. Pretty strong roster, solid gameplay, but launching with 6 courses, doubled by its last update, underwhelming single-player campaign, and underwhelming single-player content in general. Side games, clubs, challenges, several different side content, and stuff unique to previous entries was not present in Super Rush. Again, that lack of enticing content, roster, campaign, and such at launch, and hardly enough to improve that later on beyond the roster. Mario Tennis Aces handled the best of the 3 easy, but it still went through something similar. With updates, it had the strongest roster out of any Mario Tennis, and it is an unironically extremely good roster. Great gameplay, but another story mode met with lackluster reception to that. Underwhelming single-player content with less minigames and side content compared to the likes of Power Tennis or 64, between Ring Stage, Bowser Stage, Power Tennis having like 8 different minigame modes in of itself, and less courts than any Mario Tennis game with 7 total. 11 if you added Marina Stadium's different floor textures in that it affects the ball's speed and bounce, not just visual texture difference, but previous Mario Tennis games had that too, and a couple more courts to pick from. 2 constants with those Mario Sports Switch games are, the first being, in spite of them being solid adventures into their respective series, and being good games all in all, they don't offer enough in some specific area, whether characters, stages, single-player content, or side content, compared to their predecessors, to justify people's investment in the game's overall lasting appeal if it's only enough to sustain for a month at best. Something most Mario Sports games prior didn't struggle in. And because the games aren't being met with satisfactory enough content in one or more of those areas, every time Nintendo attaches that update model to the Mario Sports games, especially with Golf and Strikers, that does so unbelievably little in keeping and increasing that attraction to these games if they could be doing so much more out of the gate, and purposefully choosing to make these subsidiaries hold back on adding more or enough to these games just to add that life sustainment post-release model if there's not enough life to sustain in the first place. Again, all all three of these games are solid and enjoyable games, and for their respective series as well. But when previous installments have done more one way or another than the newest entry in some significant area that does directly correlate to the overall experience, you're gonna create more of an audience fostering spite and disapproval towards that game and current direction, dampened even further when they adopt that update model. I've already made a lengthy ass video talking about that update model and the way Nintendo does it, as there are multiple games Nintendo's made that have successfully done that update model to an already strong, well-built, entertaining, and adequate game that interest will stick just from that alone. Mario Kart 8 and Mario Kart 8 Deluxe, Super Smash Bros. Ultimate, Mario Maker 1 and 2, Splatoon 1, 2, and 3, etc. for both the paid DLC and free DLC/free update model for all of those games. Point is, the update model itself is not the problem when it comes to Mario sports games on Switch. The problem is on release, the amount that's there isn't justifying the overall package and experience for plenty of people, and what they do update and add to those games hardly changes that in the grand scheme. It still winds up being disappointing on some level to most people who are familiar with these series, and even newcomers new to Mario Tennis, Golf, Strikers, and they just don't touch them much, if at all, 2 to 4 weeks after launch. With Mario Strikers, it hurt the most, not just because Charged had missions and the larger stage and character roster, but it was also a long-awaited return to a cult classic beloved dormant Mario sports series, and after 15 years, it's a good Strikers and all, but it's about as layered as the first one. Beyond that core gameplay itself, which is basically the entire game for both the GameCube and Switch installments, it's pretty damn shallow. And adding both those caveats together, you also make an entire stir of discussion for fans of those respective series that does not become fun and can exacerbate the actual core quality of these games more than what they actually are. Strikers fans got a full taste of this the past several months, and I'll always make it a point to not let other people's perceptions and opinions dramatically affect or change yours. Your own thoughts, feelings, and experience on your game that you bought, that you played, has nothing to do with anyone else's. But with the Switch and some of its other games, like I went over before, Strikers, in spite of its solid makeup and experience for most, didn't live up to either the standard Charged set, as well as people's expectations and hopes for Strikers that could do the most with its characters, its fields, its side content, its single player content, its online, and even its gameplay. Most to all of this applies to tennis and golf as well, and while a vocal minority using hyperbole to describe it, there are millions who do feel Battle League, Super Rush, and Aces didn't deliver as much as the series did prior to some specific degree, but on a level significant enough that it does weigh down the experience for enough people to talk about. And when you assess all of that and look at Mario Baseball, I'm already anticipating it's going to follow in very similar footsteps, especially out of every Mario sports series. Baseball is the most dense in roster, decently dense in fields, very dense in gameplay, very dense in side content, dense enough in single player content. Like, there's gonna be some sizable backlash, whether vocal minority or larger, if it's not close to meeting what Super Sluggers did. You know what I mean? It'll sound stupid for some, but it's true. The gameplay's the other half of it, but it's just like Smash Brothers. That roster makes Mario Baseball. Do you know how massive Super Sluggers roster is, and how much more in-depth that gameplay becomes because of both that humongous roster, coupled with the chemistry, star power, every character's individual stats and such? Roster seems to be the running trend with Switch Mario sports games underutilizing and saving for updates. They can't slouch on a new Mario Baseball game's roster on release. If the number of characters is any less than Superstar Baseball, forget Sluggers. There's gonna be sizable and a reasonable amount of backlash because that's one of, if not the biggest appeal of Mario Baseball. If they cut out characters like King Boo, King K. Rool, the Kremlings, the other Kongs, Petey Piranha, Wiggler, Piantas, Nokis, and such, the crazy, wacky, creative add-ons, as well as even the generic basic ones like Goomba, Blooper, Toadsworth, and whatnot, yes, there are gonna be plenty of people upset with that. But if you do cut those kinds of characters out, at the very least, replace them with enough of your typical and other creative options for characters in the roster. Mario Baseball is the one Mario sub-series you can add all 7 Koopalings, and most would unironically be on board. I encourage the addition of the Koopalings to a Mario Baseball, because A, a big-ass roster is kind of the point of Mario Baseball, and B, that fundamentally adds to the gameplay, assuming it's largely like the first 2 games. The Koopalings do add that much more to a Mario Baseball than they ever would to Mario Kart or any Mario spinoff. But why stop there? You have the obvious Rosalina, Aluma, and Pauline, but you also have Nabbit, you also have King Babam, Charge and Chuck, Ice Bro amongst the Hammer Bro family, Spike, Chain Chomps, Gooper Blooper, iRock, Mr. I, Octoombas, Pokies, Bouldergeist, Honey Queen, Cappy, Tiara, the Broodals, Madame Brood from Mario Odyssey, New Donkers from New Donk City, the Sprixie Fairies, Boom Boom, Pom Pom, Professor Egad, Plessy, other Kongs like Swanky Kong, Lanky Kong, Cranky Kong, etc., Wario Land / Ware characters like Syrup, Mona, Ashley, Cat and Anna, Cricket, 9V, 18V, etc., RPG characters like Fawful, Cacletta the Shroobs, Young Princess Shroob, Elder Princess Shroob, Prince Peasley, Dreambird, etc., Starlo, since Nintendo now fully owns the entire Mario and Luigi trademark on top of the entirety of Super Sluggers' roster. Even with just half of these options adding to Super Sluggers' roster, that is more than enough to make for an insanely good roster for a new Mario Baseball. Free. Gameplay-wise, you don't even have to change that. Maintaining that great formula works just fine. You just have to add more characters to it. Most of this, I'm gonna speak for me personally, but 7 to 12 fields can work. One based on each captain and or new themes altogether. A campaign like the original, and most of the minigames / side modes from the previous installments, if not new ones that are good, can also suffice. They have what they need to make for a great follow-up after 15 years to Super Sluggers, especially if it has most of that quality content to suffice at launch. There's nothing really to gripe or worry about much over, if that's the case. But can we have hope Nintendo's not gonna hold Bamco back on trying to deliver on those expectations and make a really good, enticing, captivating Mario Baseball at launch? Even if it gets updates, that initial launch has to be considerably strong on every front. Gameplay, depth, roster, fields, single-player content, online. Mario Baseball could also use online, but it's so hard when every Mario sports game didn't live up to their hype at worst, or almost at best for most people. And Mario Baseball's the other long-awaited cult classic sports sub-series millions wanted to return to. And even if it winds up being great out of the gate, best case scenario on every single front, I think they're setting themselves up for disaster if that update model's attached to it, like the other sports titles. And we all know it's going to anyways. The other games like Mario Kart, Smash, Splatoon, Mario Maker, etc., they have the content, gameplay, and density to hold millions over for an extended period of time without those updates. The Mario sports games since 2018 haven't, and that immediately gives the implication that you're just going to hold out on specific characters, modes and such to artificially add life to that game when that does the exact opposite with Mario Sports. If the overall content isn't satisfactory for most when compared to predecessors, you're not giving people the incentive or reason to commit to that game for several months if that game, that product, is not worth investing based solely on its overall quality already. That just gives the idea, especially for a game as lackluster as Mario Golf Super Rush and Mario Strikers Battle League when those came out, that you're trying to skimp out on specific characters, stages, and modes and such, and are either promising or vaguely promising the idea of such coming later on to maintain interest of these games after launch. And specifically with Mario Sports, it's backfired more often than not, and especially coming off Battle League, I really do not want baseball to suffer the same, and when it doesn't deserve to, like any of the Mario Sports games don't deserve to. I think it's inevitable we'll get a Mario Baseball in the near or semi-distant future. Probably a safe bet the gameplay will be enjoyable and great as well, assuming it's like the same. But that roster and side content is also going to play a huge factor in whether we'll get a Mario Baseball that'll deliver or not for most. That discussion around it especially will be pretty spicy. Either route it goes, it's not going to be fun for some people, I'd imagine, either way. But I really hope we get a Mario Baseball we could call a worthy or solid follow-up from Sluggers. I'm crossing fingers, partially hesitant still. It'll be a matter of time. Thank you for listening and watching, and we'll see what the future holds for Mario Sports. Stay super.
Yo, hey, 妹妹，嘿，我来呀！共和大哈哈呀！拉面，嘿，来面，买个面，共和再见呀！哈哈，拉面，下手面，谢谢。